There's something deeply strange about the way human beings affect one another, especially when they're not even trying. You walk into a room, you say a few words, maybe you don't even notice the tone of your own voice. And somewhere, in the mind of another person, something shifts. Their heart rate changes. Their attention sharpens. They feel it physically, like a kind of tremor under the surface. And you remain completely unaware. That's not trivial. That's not accidental. It speaks to something profound about the structure of social reality, that your mere presence, your pattern of being, has consequences far beyond what you consciously intend. You're not just an isolated individual moving through the world. You're a force of interpretation for others. You become a symbol, a signal, a source of emotional meaning in someone else's life, often without permission, and certainly without full understanding. And what's unsettling about that is not simply that someone might feel drawn to you, but that this response emerges from who you are at a level you haven't fully articulated. It's not just what you say, it's what you embody. Your posture, your restraint, your chaos, your discipline, your contradictions, they all communicate something. And someone else, perhaps quietly, perhaps intensely, is responding to that in a way that feels almost involuntary. So the question isn't just why they feel that way. The deeper question is, what are you carrying unknowingly that has that kind of impact? Because whatever it is, it's real. And it means you're affecting the world in ways that extend far beyond your conscious awareness. You walk through the world assuming, perhaps quite naively, that your impact on other people is limited to what you explicitly say and deliberately do. You think that if you keep to yourself, if you remain relatively quiet, if you avoid unnecessary attention, then you pass through social space without leaving much of a trace. But that's not how it works. It's not even close to how it works. Human beings are extraordinarily sensitive creatures. We are constantly watching, interpreting, decoding. Not just language, but posture, tone, hesitation, eye movement. Subtle cues that operate far beneath conscious awareness. And so even when you believe you're neutral, even when you think you're insignificant in a given moment, you are still broadcasting information. You are still, in a very real sense, telling a story about who you are. Now, here's where it becomes complicated. That story isn't constructed only out of your intentions. It's built out of your habits, your past decisions, your unresolved conflicts, your discipline, or your lack of it. It's reflected in how you stand, how you listen, how quickly you react, how carefully you choose your words. And other people, whether they want to or not, are responding to that story. They're forming impressions, emotional reactions, even attachments, based on something you might not even recognize in yourself. So when someone feels something in your presence, nervousness, admiration, curiosity, even something as visceral as those so-called butterflies, it's not random. It's a response to a pattern of being that you've developed over time. And that pattern has weight. It has psychological reality. It reaches into other people's perception and alters it, sometimes in ways that are immediate and powerful. What's particularly unsettling is that you don't get to fully control how that interpretation unfolds. You can't step into someone else's mind and regulate their response to you. They're interacting not only with who you are, but with their own history, their own expectations, their own desires. And yet, despite that complexity, you are still a central variable in that equation. You are still the catalyst for something that feels intensely real to them. And so you might find yourself in a situation where someone is deeply affected by you, more than you would ever predict, while you remain almost entirely oblivious. That gap between your awareness and their experience is where a great deal of confusion, and sometimes even chaos, begins to emerge. Because from your perspective, nothing extraordinary is happening. But from theirs, something significant has already taken root. That should give you pause, because it suggests that your responsibility extends beyond your conscious intentions. It means that who you are, at a fundamental level, is not a private matter. It's something that radiates outward, that shapes the emotional and psychological landscape of the people around you. And if you fail to recognize that, then you're blind to a substantial portion of your own influence in the world. Most of what drives human attraction does not occur where you can easily observe it. It doesn't arise neatly in conscious thought, where someone sits down, evaluates a list of qualities, and decides in a rational, articulated way that they feel something for you. That's not how it unfolds. It's far more primitive than that, and far more complex at the same time. There are layers of perception operating beneath awareness. Ancient systems that evolved long before language, long before deliberate reasoning. These systems are attuned to pattern symmetry, confidence, emotional stability, unpredictability, even subtle signs of competence or vulnerability, and they respond instantly. Before a person can explain why they feel a certain way around you, they already feel it. Their body reacts. Their attention locks in. Something about you registers as significant, and that significance isn't negotiated consciously. You might think that what matters most is what you say, the arguments you make, the personality you present on the surface. But that's a relatively thin layer compared to what's happening underneath. People are responding to how you carry yourself when you're not thinking about it. They're responding to the coherence, or incoherence, between your words and your actions. They're detecting whether you're grounded or fragmented, whether you're comfortable in your own skin, or subtly at war with yourself. And that's where things become particularly interesting, because the aspects of yourself that have the greatest impact are often the ones you haven't fully examined. Your habits, your emotional regulation, your level of discipline, your capacity to remain composed under pressure, these are not things you can easily fake. They leak out, so to speak, in micro behaviors, in the way you pause before answering a question, in how you respond to uncertainty, in whether your attention is steady or constantly shifting. Someone else, observing all of this, may not be able to articulate what they're noticing. They won't say, "I'm attracted to the fact that your behavior demonstrates a consistent alignment between your internal state and your external actions." That's not how people talk. Instead, they'll say something much simpler. "I don't know what it is about you." But that statement is pointing to something very real. It's an acknowledgement that the source of their reaction lies outside of conscious explanation. And that's precisely the point. Attraction, in many cases, is not a decision. It's a perception that emerges from systems you don't directly control. It's shaped by signals that are subtle, layered, and often contradictory. You can be calm and intense at the same time, reserved but attentive, disciplined, yet unpredictable in just the right way. These combinations create a kind of complexity that the human mind finds compelling, even if it can't fully decode it. So when someone feels something just by hearing your name, it's not because they've logically concluded that they should. It's because, at some level beneath their awareness, you've already been categorized as meaningful, as someone who disrupts their normal patterns of attention. And that disruption carries emotional weight, whether they understand it or not. You tend to overestimate the importance of what you say and underestimate the significance of how you exist while saying it. That's a fundamental miscalculation. Because in most real interactions, words are not the primary carrier of meaning. They are, at best, a surface-level articulation of something much deeper, and people are remarkably skilled at detecting that deeper layer, even if they can't describe it. You can construct the right sentences, choose them carefully, even rehearse them, and still fail to communicate what you intend, because your presence contradicts your words. There's a lack of alignment, and that misalignment is what people notice. It's what unsettles them, or alternatively, what draws them in. Because when there is alignment, when what you say is consistent with how you carry yourself, it produces a kind of clarity that is both rare and compelling. Presence is not a vague or mystical concept. It's built out of very concrete elements. Your posture, for example, signals whether you're prepared to engage with the world or retreat from it. The way you hold eye contact indicates whether you're attentive or avoidant. Your tone of voice reveals whether you're confident, uncertain, defensive, or open. Even your silence communicates something. In fact, sometimes it communicates more than speech, and these signals are continuous. They don't turn off when you stop talking. If anything, they become more pronounced, because in the absence of words, people rely even more heavily on what they can observe directly. They start to fill in the gaps, to interpret your stillness, your expressions, your timing. And those interpretations shape how they feel about you, often more strongly than anything you could have said. Now, this becomes particularly relevant when you consider the idea that someone might be affected by you in ways you don't recognize, because what they're responding to isn't just your statements or your obvious actions. They're responding to the entirety of your presence, the consistency of it, the stability of it, the subtle tensions within it, the degree to which it suggests that you are grounded, or alternatively, that you are fragmented and uncertain. You might believe that you're keeping things neutral, that you're not revealing much, that you're simply existing without making an impression. But neutrality, in the way you imagine it, doesn't actually exist. Even restraint communicates something. It can signal control, or it can signal suppression. It can be interpreted as confidence or as fear, depending on how it's embodied. And people are constantly making those distinctions, often without realizing it. So when someone reacts to you, when they feel drawn in or unsettled or intensely aware of your presence, it's not because of a single sentence you delivered perfectly. It's because your entire mode of being is conveying something coherent enough to register. Or, in some cases, something complex enough to intrigue. And that operates at a level that is far more immediate and far less controllable than the words you choose to speak. You can present an image of yourself to the world, and most people do, at least to some degree. You adopt certain mannerisms, you adjust your tone, you choose your words carefully, all in an attempt to shape how others perceive you. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's part of social interaction, but there's a limit to how far that construction can take you, because people are not responding only to the mask you put on. They're responding, far more powerfully, to what lies beneath it. There's a distinction between what you project and what you embody, and it's a critical one. Projection is deliberate. It's calculated. It's the version of yourself that you believe will be accepted, admired, or at least tolerated. Embodiment, on the other hand, is the result of repetition over time. It's what you become through your habits, your decisions, your patterns of behavior, and that's not something you can switch on and off at will. If you try to present confidence without actually developing it, for example, it shows. Not necessarily in obvious ways, but in subtle inconsistencies. A slight hesitation where there shouldn't be one, a shift in tone when you're challenged, a break in eye contact at precisely the wrong moment. These are small things, but they accumulate. And people pick up on them, even if they can't explain what they've noticed. On the other hand, when something is genuinely embodied, it has a kind of stability that's difficult to imitate. If you've developed discipline, it reflects in how you manage your time, how you respond to difficulty, how you carry yourself when things don't go your way. If you've cultivated self-respect, it shows in the boundaries you set, in the way you speak, in the fact that you don't overextend yourself for approval. These qualities are not performances. They are integrated into your behavior at a fundamental level. And this is where attraction, or emotional response more broadly, becomes less about what you claim to be and more about what you consistently demonstrate, because consistency is what signals authenticity. It's what allows another person to trust that what they're perceiving is real, even if they don't consciously frame it that way. They sense that there's something solid there, something that doesn't fluctuate dramatically from moment to moment. Now, when someone reacts to you strongly, when they feel something just by hearing your name, it's not because you've successfully convinced them of a particular image. It's because, at some level, they've detected a pattern that feels coherent and meaningful. Something about the way you exist aligns in a way that stands out against the background of inconsistency they encounter elsewhere, and that has implications that go beyond simple attraction. It means that what you repeatedly do, how you repeatedly respond, is shaping not only your own character, but the way others experience you. You don't get to separate those two things. The person you are becoming is the same person that others are interpreting, reacting to, and in some cases, being deeply affected by. There's a tendency to assume that if you don't intend to affect someone, then you're not responsible for the impact you have on them. That assumption is comforting, but it's not accurate, because intention and impact are not the same thing, and the gap between them can be wider than you expect. You can move through the world believing that you're neutral, that you're not interfering, not influencing, not leaving a mark, and still be the source of a very real emotional response in someone else. And that becomes a problem when you consider how little attention people pay to the unintended consequences of their presence. You might think that responsibility begins and ends with what you explicitly choose to say or do. But if your behavior, your patterns, your way of carrying yourself consistently generate reactions in others, then ignoring that doesn't absolve you of anything. It simply means you're unaware of the role you're playing. Now, that doesn't mean you're responsible for every feeling someone has. That would be absurd. People bring their own histories, their own sensitivities, their own interpretations into every interaction. But it does mean that if there is a consistent pattern, if people tend to react to you in similar ways, if your presence repeatedly produces a certain kind of response, then there's something they're worth examining. Because patterns don't emerge out of nothing. The difficulty is that these patterns are often subtle, and they don't announce themselves clearly. Someone might feel drawn to you, unsettled by you, intrigued by you without ever expressing it directly, and so you remain unaware. From your perspective, everything appears ordinary. But from theirs, something meaningful is taking place, something that has emotional weight and psychological significance. That disconnect can lead to complications. Because when you don't recognize the effect you have, you can't regulate it. You can't decide how to respond to it, how to set boundaries around it, how to engage with it in a way that is honest and responsible. Instead, you move forward blindly, and the other person is left to deal with an experience that you helped create, but don't fully acknowledge. And that's where responsibility becomes important, not as a burden, but as a form of awareness. It requires you to pay attention to how you exist in the world, not just what you intend, but what you consistently produce. It asks you to notice whether your actions align with your values, whether your presence reflects a level of integrity that you can stand behind. Because if you are affecting people, and you are, whether you like it or not, then it matters what exactly you're bringing into those interactions. It matters whether you are grounded or chaotic, clear or contradictory, disciplined or careless. Those qualities don't remain confined within you. They extend outward, shaping the experiences of others in ways that are often more significant than you realize. Once you begin to understand that your presence has a measurable effect on other people, that it reaches into their perception and alters it in ways you don't fully control, it forces a shift in how you carry yourself. Because you can no longer maintain the illusion that you're just an isolated observer, moving through the world without consequence. You're participating in something far more dynamic than that. You're shaping and being shaped by every interaction you enter into. That realization introduces a certain weight. Not an oppressive weight, but a kind of responsibility that demands attention. Because if your way of being is influencing others, if it can create attraction, tension, curiosity, even discomfort, then it becomes necessary to ask what exactly you're projecting and whether it aligns with the person you're trying to become. Not the person you claim to be, but the one you actually are when no one is watching. And that's where self-awareness becomes less of a philosophical idea and more of a practical necessity. You have to start observing yourself in the same way others might observe you. How do you respond under pressure? Do you become reactive, defensive, scattered? Or do you maintain a level of composure that signals stability? Because those moments, the unguarded ones, are where your underlying structure reveals itself most clearly. It's also where inconsistency becomes visible. You might think you're disciplined, but if that discipline collapses the moment you're challenged, then what you have is not discipline, but a temporary state. And people can detect that, often without being able to articulate how. They sense the gap between what you appear to be and what you actually are, and that gap influences how they feel in your presence. On the other hand, when there is alignment, when your actions, your reactions, and your intentions form a coherent pattern, it creates a kind of reliability. Not predictability in a dull sense, but a stability that others can orient themselves around. They know, at least intuitively, what to expect from you, and that reduces uncertainty, which in turn shapes how comfortable or engaged they feel when they're around you. But achieving that alignment is not a matter of superficial adjustment. It requires a deeper process of refinement. You have to examine your habits, your tendencies, the ways in which you avoid responsibility or distort the truth, even in small ways, because those distortions accumulate and they manifest in your behavior whether you acknowledge them or not. And as you become more aware of this, you start to recognize that how you carry yourself is not just a reflection of your internal state, but also a signal that others are constantly interpreting. It affects how seriously you're taken, how much attention you command, how people feel when they hear your name or anticipate your presence. That awareness doesn't give you total control, but it does give you the opportunity to be more deliberate, more precise, more aligned in the way you move through the world.